Breaking tonight, the president defends his new gun rules in a national town hall and challenges the NRA.
There's a reason why the NRA is not here. They're just down the street. And since this is the main reason they exist, you'd think that they'd be prepared to have a debate with the president.
They haven't been to the White House in 3 years.
We've invited them. We've invited them.
So right now, tonight, you're saying you would be welcome to meet.
We have invited them repeatedly.
And now in a Kelly File exclusive, the National Rifle Association responds for the first time to President Obama's direct challenge and to his new push for more gun control. Welcome to the Kelly File, everyone. I'm Megyn Kelly. In moments, we will be joined by Chris Cox, the executive director of the NRA's Institute for Legislative Action, in an exclusive. But first, President Obama taking part in an event the White House is calling a town hall on the campus of a Washington, D.C. university. In the last year of his presidency, with his legacy potentially on the line, the president issuing a new challenge to the country to reconsider one of the most cherished American rights to some extent, the Second Amendment, the right to bear arms. We have got a huge and important lineup for you tonight on this, on the political and the legal fallout from the president's executive action, and what this means for the gun rights of all Americans. Judge Andrew Napolitano is our Fox News senior judicial analyst. Mark Thiessen is a former speechwriter for President George W. Bush. Bill Burton is the former White House deputy press secretary under President Obama. But first, here is some of what President Obama said, including when Mr. Obama suggested that the NRA profits off of misleading the American public.
Every year, we're losing 30,000 people to gun violence. And if we take that number from 30,000 down to, let's say, 28,000, that's 2,000 families who don't have to go through what the families at Newtown or San Bernardino or Charleston went through. Historically, the NRA was in favor of background checks. Historically, many in the Republican Party were in favor of background checks. And what's changed is not that my proposals are particularly radical. What's changed is we've suddenly created an atmosphere in which I put out a proposal like background checks, or after Sandy Hook, we're calling on Congress, along with people like Gabby Gifford, who herself was a victim of gun violence. We put out a proposal that is common sense, modest, does not claim to solve every problem, is respectful of the Second Amendment, and the way it is described is that we're trying to take away everybody's guns. Every time there's a mass shooting, gun sales spike. And part of the reason is that the NRA is convinced, many of its members, that somebody's going to come grab your guns, which is, by the way, really profitable for the gun manufacturers. It's a great advertising mechanism, but it's not necessary.
And we begin tonight with our Kelly File exclusive. The NRA's Chris Cox with his organization's first response to President Obama. Chris, thank you so much for being here. So let's start with the notion that he wants to meet with you. He went on to say, if only you'll put aside your rhetoric and what he seemed to be describing as straw men when it comes to gun issues. Are you prepared to meet with him?
Well, Megyn, let's be clear what this is really about. This president's trying to create an illusion that he's doing something to keep people safe. He needs to do that because the truth is his policies have failed miserably. We saw that materialize itself in San Bernardino when we had a terrorist attack. This president didn't use it as an opportunity to unite this country. He didn't use it as an opportunity to lay out a plan to defeat terrorism. He used it as an opportunity to impose more gun control on law-abiding Americans.
He's
so let's
treating
be clear.
that as a case of gun violence as well.
Exactly. This is an attempt to distract the American people away from his failed policies. So did we participate in CNN's event tonight? No, we didn't. We were offered one pre-screened question. Megyn, I know that you don't send your questions over to the White House, so I'd rather have a conversation with you that's intellectually honest than sit through a lecture and get one opportunity to ask a pre-screened question.
Does it make sense to meet with him?
Well, and talk about what, Megan? This president can talk about background checks all day long, but that's nothing more than a distraction away from the fact that he can't keep us safe, and he supported every gun control proposal that's ever been made. He doesn't support the individual right to own a firearm. That's been the position of his Supreme Court nominees. That's been the position of his administration. So what are we going to talk about? Basketball? I'm not really interested in going over and talking to the president who doesn't have a basic level of respect or understanding of the Second Amendment and law-abiding gun owners in this country.
Here's what he said. Tonight he tried to say this, that there's not an area of our lives that we don't make a little safer. He talked about little toys for children that they could choke on. He talked about cars and seatbelt laws. And he said to not apply that same principle to guns would be inconsistent.
Megan, this president would have the American people believe that in order to love your children, you have to hate your firearms. That's not only offensive, it's disgusting. This president would have you believe that somehow we don't care about keeping our kids safe. Gun owners in this country do more, and the National Rifle Association does more to teach safe and responsible gun ownership than this president ever has or ever will.
When he talks about the gun show loophole, which is what his executive action is trying to get at, among other things, and he went on to say that that's a massive loophole and that people have exploited it to avoid background checks, and sometimes those guns have wound up being used in murders.
Megan, the San Bernardino murderer had something in common with the Santa Barbara murder and the Tucson murder and the Aurora murder and the Chattanooga, the Charleston, the Southern Virginia. All of them went through President Obama's background check, and every one of them passed. Every one of those murderers passed this background check.
It's a huge
so
problem.
We can talk about it's 0.7%, according to Barack Obama's Justice Department. 0.7% of criminals obtain their firearms through gun shows. 0.7%.
That's an unbelievable stat, the way you listed it there, that all those murderers went through and passed the background check. He was sort of asked about that, and you saw Paul Babot, the sheriff out in Arizona, get up there and say, none of your measures would have prevented any of these mass shootings, right? None of them. And President Obama said, look, mental health problems are real. Violent crime is real. We're not going to stop either of those entirely in this country, which is that's not realistic. He said the question is, can we make it less lethal when it happens? And he cited an example that he cited the other day out of China. Right around the time Newtown happened, it was 2010, a guy took a knife, guns are banned there over there, it stabbed 23 children, not one died because he didn't have a semi-automatic rifle, is what the president said.
Megan, this president in his 8th year has decided he wants to talk about doing something about prosecutions in this country. He has overseen a 40% decrease in the prosecution of criminal misuse of firearms. At the same time, as if that's not bad enough, he's going back and releasing armed criminals who have been successfully prosecuted and sent to jail. This president's lost all credibility because he's no longer credible to speak to the issues of law-abiding gun owners.
All right, last question, Chris. He brought up Newtown, which is moving to every American with a heart. And he cried the other day at the White House and talking about Newtown, and it's not tough to figure out why. You know, when you think back to the children, the 6-year-olds who were murdered by some lunatic that day, the face of evil. And he said it was the only time in his presidency he's ever seen the Secret Service cry when they went to Newtown days after. One of the worst days of my presidency. What is your solution? How do you say we prevent another Newtown?
Well, Megan, the president doesn't have a monopoly on compassion in this country. The president doesn't have a monopoly on loving and caring about kids. The president doesn't get to lecture us on loving our kids and caring about our kids. This president has done nothing to keep us safe. His policies have been a failure from start to finish. The National Rifle Association believes that we should protect our kids in our schools the same way we protect our president, our politicians, our athletes, and our money at our banks. And that's with armed security officers. Armed security officers protecting our kids at school. At the same time, we can do something about mental health. Megan, you and I have been on this show talking about the need for mental health reform. This president in year 8 has decided he wants to have a conversation. Welcome to the party. The National Rifle Association has been trying to have this conversation for years. So have Republicans in Congress who tried to do something meaningful, but this president was more interested in defeating the NRA than defeating crime, defeating a mental health problem, and ultimately defeating terrorism. It's a shame, but it's what we've come to expect out of this president.
Up until just now, where the president's pushing for more money on mental health, the vice president was quoted by a lawmaker saying that they're not interested in that. They're tabling that for now. Chris, I got to run. I thank you for being here tonight.
Thank you.
Joining me now with more, Judge Andrew Napolitano. When you listen to the president through the tears and Raising Newtown talk about it, it sounds simple, right? Like, of course, we need to do more to protect children. When you hear the other side, you're reminded of how complicated this issue really is when you actually look at the cold, hard facts.
The president was not being intellectually honest tonight, Megan, because the president kept referring to my proposal, my proposal, my proposal. Every one of those proposals was rejected by the Congress. The Congress writes the laws, not the president. Yet the president has offered in his speech on Tuesday of this week to enact these into law via executive order and executive authority. Basically,
it's the same thing that happened with immigration.
Correct. And the courts stopped him with respect to immigration and basically said you can't change the immigration laws, and they will stop him with respect to this. The issue is not the wisdom of what he wants to do. The issue is the authority. He does not have the authority to change the law, no matter how noble his goals may be, and he understands that.
Not even around the edges? I mean, this is like tighten the loophole that allows the gun sales in certain cases.
If Congress had remained silent on it, and the president wanted to try to regulate an area of congressional silence, there's some authority in constitutional jurisprudence that would let him wade in there. But Congress has not been silent. What he failed to say at that town hall meeting tonight is that Congress rejected his proposals 3 times during his presidency, including when Congress was controlled by the Democrats in the first 2 years.
Right.
He cannot overcome the will of Congress by rewriting the law. Then he's a prince rather than a president.
Judge, thank you.
You're welcome.